Pompeo Batoni is widely celebrated as one of the preeminent painters of 18th century Rome, distinguished for his masterful portraits and historical works. Born on January 25, 1708, in Lucca, Italy, Batoni would go on to become a central figure in Italian art, shaping the way nobility and visitors on the Grand Tour were portrayed. His legacy bridges Baroque richness and the emerging Neoclassical style, with works that emphasize clarity, detail, and a nuanced approach to character. Pompeo Batoni was born into a family of skilled goldsmiths, and his early exposure to the craftsmanship of precious metals played a vital role in nurturing his artistic inclination. His father, Paolo Batoni, was known for his fine work, and young Pompeo gained an early appreciation for precise design and decorative detailing. Though initially trained in his father's craft, Pompeo showed a greater interest in painting, an art form he decided to pursue professionally. At the age of 19, Batoni moved to Rome to study, where he was influenced by the city's classical antiquities, Renaissance masters, and the work of contemporary Baroque artists. Rome in the 18th century was a bustling center for artists, drawing students and patrons from all over Europe, particularly those on the Grand Tour, a tradition where wealthy young men from Britain and other countries traveled to Italy to study art, history, and culture. This atmosphere was ripe for Batoni's talent, and he swiftly became acquainted with classical sculpture and Renaissance masterpieces, especially those of Raphael and Annibale Carracci. Batoni's studies imbued his work with a profound respect for classical antiquity, which, coupled with his unique style, would define his career. Batoni's technical skill and classical influences soon attracted commissions, and his early works began to exhibit the qualities for which he would later become known. Initially, he created religious paintings and mythological scenes, reflecting the Baroque style's influence. However, Batoni's work quickly diverged from the intense drama typical of Baroque art. His approach favored grace and balance, aligning more closely with the refined tastes of the European elite, who found his style particularly appealing. By the mid-1740s, Batoni had established a reputable studio in Rome, which became a focal point for visitors of the Grand Tour. These travelers sought a portrait that would encapsulate their cultured journey through Italy, and Batoni's art perfectly suited this need. Unlike traditional portraiture, which often presented sitters in stiff, formal poses, Batoni's style was relaxed, incorporating classical elements and symbols that emphasized the sitter's intellect and virtues. This innovative approach led him to become the most sought-after portraitist for foreign dignitaries and aristocrats visiting Rome. Batoni's fame spread throughout Europe largely due to his Grand Tour portraits. These portraits were unique in that they combined traditional portraiture with elements of history painting, showing the sitters amidst classical statues, Roman ruins, or within lush, idealized landscapes. The subjects often held books, gazed upon famous monuments, or adopted stances reminiscent of classical sculptures, symbolizing their learning and cultural refinement. Batoni's portraits balanced meticulous detail with the grandeur of antiquity, offering his clients a tangible memento of their Italian experience. Among Batoni's most celebrated sitters were British aristocrats and notable figures such as Charles John Crowell, the Prince of Wales, later King George III, and Emperor Joseph II of the Holy Roman Empire. His portraits gave the Grand Tour sitters an air of dignity and gravitas, making them appear not only as wealthy travelers, but as true connoisseurs of classical art and scholarship. Batoni's technique and choice of composition for these works were instrumental in shaping the iconic image of the Grand Tour, a vision of nobility infused with intellectual curiosity. Batoni's approach to painting blended the fluidity and coloristic brilliance of the Baroque with the emerging neoclassical precision. His technique emphasized clarity, harmonious color palettes, and a smoothness that contrasted with the heavy textures of his Baroque predecessors. Batoni had a meticulous attention to detail, especially in rendering fabrics, textures, and the skin tones of his subjects, lending his portraits an aura of polished realism. His works exhibit an extraordinary balance, a characteristic evident in his use of carefully orchestrated poses and gestures. Batoni's sitters are often depicted with a calm demeanor, reflecting his preference for psychological depth over emotional intensity. His harmonious compositions are highlighted by the light, which Batoni used strategically to enhance the nobility of his subjects and add a serene glow to his paintings. His understanding of light, combined with his skill in creating realistic flesh tones, gave his portraits an unmatched lifelike quality. In addition to portraiture, Batoni excelled in creating historical and religious paintings. His altarpieces and scenes from mythology exhibit a remarkable command over narrative, with carefully composed figures and idealized landscapes. In these works, Batoni often drew on classical mythology and biblical themes, painting with an elegance that appealed to religious patrons and art collectors alike. While Batoni's fame primarily rested on his portraiture, he was equally adept at religious and historical painting. His altarpieces, such as the Sacred Heart of Jesus, 1767, commissioned by the Jesuits, showcased his ability to convey spiritual reverence and devotion. The work became an important religious icon, influencing depictions of the Sacred Heart in Catholic art for generations. As Batoni aged, he continued to paint, though he faced growing competition from a younger generation of neoclassical artists, including Anton Raphael Mengs. However, Batoni's unique ability to blend classical themes with contemporary portraiture sustained his reputation, and his studio in Rome remained active and successful. Pompeo Batoni's contribution to art history is best appreciated in the context of the transition between the Baroque and Neoclassical periods. His portraits were instrumental in shaping the Grand Tour aesthetic, providing a model that many artists would later emulate. The fact that so many of Batoni's portraits remain preserved in prominent European collections attests to his lasting influence and the esteem in which his patrons held him. Batoni's works contributed to the dissemination of classical ideals across Europe. His emphasis on refined dignity and classical beauty influenced the direction of European portraiture, especially in England, where artists like Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough were indirectly inspired by his work. The classical sensibilities Batoni championed helped shape the emerging Neoclassical movement, which would dominate European art by the end of the 18th century. Despite being celebrated for his portraiture, Batoni's historical and religious paintings should not be overlooked. His ability to synthesize Renaissance ideals with an 18th century sensibility broadened the appeal of classical themes, making them accessible to a modern audience. The harmony and clarity that defined his style anticipated neoclassical ideals and foreshadowed the tastes of a new generation of artists and patrons. Batoni was known to be deeply dedicated to his art, with an even temper and a refined sensibility. His character matched the elegance of his paintings, and he was well respected in Rome's art circles. Although he achieved great success, Batoni remained modest, focusing on his work rather than seeking fame. He married twice, first to Caterina Setti, with whom he had several children, and later, following her death, to Lucia Fattori. Batoni's ability to harmonize the classical past with the evolving tastes of his time allowed him to create timeless works, securing his position as one of the great Italian painters of the 18th century. His influence persisted well beyond his death, as artists continued to draw inspiration from his masterful blend of realism, classical beauty, and psychological insight.